Old man took a swig or two and got sort of warmed up and went to ripping again. He had been drunk over in town and laid in the gutter all night, and he was a sight to look at. A body would have thought he was Adam. He was just all mud. Whenever his liquor begun to work, he most always went for the government. This time he says, "Call this a government? Why, just look at it and see what it's like. Here's the law standing ready to take a man's son away from him, a man's own son, which he has had all the trouble and all the anxiety and all the expense of raising. Yes, just as that man has got that son raised at last, and ready to go to work and begin to do something for him, and give him a rest, the law up and goes for him. And they call that government. That ain't all, nuther. The law backs that old Judge Thatcher up and helps him to keep me out of my property. Here's what the law does. The law takes a man worth $6,000 and upwards, and jams him into an old trap of cabin like this, and lets him go round in clothes that ain't fitting for a hog. They call that government. A man can't get his rights in a government like this. Sometimes I've a mighty notion to just leave the country for good and all. Yes, and I told him so. I told old Thatcher so to his face. Lots of 'em heard me and can tell what I said. Says I, for 2 cents I'd leave the blamed country and never come near it again. Them's the very words. I says, look at my hat, if you call it a hat, but the lid raises up and the rest of it goes down till it's below my chin. And then it ain't rightly a hat at all, but more like my head was shoved up through a gentle stovepipe. Look at it, I says. Such a hat for me to wear. One of the wealthiest men in this town if I could get my rights. Oh, yes, this is a wonderful government. Wonderful. Why, looky here. There is a free nigger there from Ohio, a mulatto, most as white as any man. He had the whitest shirt on you ever see, too, and the shiniest hat, and there ain't a man in that town that's got as fine clothes as what he had, and he had a gold watch and chain and a silver-headed cane, the awfullest old gray-headed nabob in the state. And what do you think? They said he was a professor in a college, and could talk all kinds of languages and knowed everything. And that ain't the worst. They said he could vote when he was at home. Well, that let me out. Thinks I, what is the country a-comin' to? It was 'lection day, and I was just about to go and vote myself if I warn't too drunk to get there. But when they told me there was a state in this country where they'd let that nigger vote, I drawed out. I says I'll never vote again. Them's the very words I said. They all heard me. And the country may rot for all me. I'll never vote again as long as I live. And to see the cool way of that nigger, why, he wouldn't have given me the road if I hadn't shoved him out of the way. I says to the people, why ain't this nigger put up at auction and sold? That's what I want to know. And what do you reckon they said? Why, they said he couldn't be sold till he'd been in the state 6 months, and he hadn't been there that long yet. There now, that's a specimen. They call that a government that can't sell a free nigger till he's been in the state 6 months. Here's a government that calls itself a government, and lets it on to be a government, and thinks it is a government, and yet it's got to set stock still for 6 whole months before it can get a hold of a prowling, thieving, infernal, white-shirted free nigger, and... Pap was a-going on so he never noticed where his old Limberlegs was taking him to. So he went head over heels over the tub of salt pork, and barked both shins, and the rest of his speech was all the hottest kind of language, mostly hove at the nigger and the government, though he give the tub some, too, while along here and there. He hopped around the cabin considerable, first on one leg and then on the other, holding first one shin and then the other one, and at last he let out with his left foot all of a sudden and fetched the tub a rattling kick. But it warn't a good judgment, because that was the boot that had a couple of his toes leaking out of the front end of it. So now he raised a howl that fairly made a body's hair raise, and down he went in the dirt and rolled there and held his toes, and the cussin' he done then laid over anything he had ever done previous. He said so his own self afterwards. He had heard old Soberry Hagan in his best days, and he said it laid over him, too, but I reckon that was sort of piling it on, maybe. After supper, Pap took the jug, and said he had enough whiskey there for 2 drunks and 1 delirium tremens. That was always his word. I judged he'd be blind drunk in about an hour, and then I would steal the key or saw myself out one or the other. He drank and tumbled down on his blankets by and by, but luck didn't run my way. He didn't go sound asleep, but was uneasy. He groaned and moaned and thrashed round this way and that for a long time. At last I got so sleepy I couldn't keep my eyes open, all I could do, and so before I knowed what I was about, I was sound asleep, and the candle burning. I don't know how long I was asleep, but all of a sudden there was an awful scream, and I was up. There was Pap looking wild, and skipping around every which way and yelling about snakes. He said they was crawling up his legs, and then he would give a jump and scream and say one had bit him on the cheek, but I couldn't see no snakes. He started and run around and round the cabin hollering, take him off, he's biting me on the neck." I never see a man look so wild in the eyes. Pretty soon he was all fagged out and fell down panting. Then he rolled over and over wonderful fast, kicking things every which way and striking and grabbing at the air with his hands, and screaming and saying there was devils a-hold of him. He wore out by and by, and laid still a while, moaning. Then he laid stiller, and didn't make a sound. I could hear the owls and the wolves away off in the woods, and it seemed terrible still. He was layin' over by the corner. By and by he raised up part way and listened, with his head to one side. He says very low, "Tramp, tramp, tramp, that's the dead. Tramp, 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 they're coming after me, but I won't go. Oh, they're here. Don't touch me, don't. Hands off. They're cold, let go. Oh, let a poor devil alone." Then he went down on all fours and crawled off, begging them to let him alone, and he rolled himself up in his blanket and wallowed in under the old pine table, still a-begging, and then he went to crying. I could hear him through the blanket. By and by he rolled out and jumped up on his feet looking wild, and he see me and went for me. He chased me round and round the place with a clasp knife, calling me the angel of death, and saying